a collaborative project funded by the Town Creek Foundation for the first 3 years of our project. And it includes 6 founding partner organizations, which you can see listed here. That means that we have different email addresses, those of us who are working on this project. So I happen to be housed with Chesapeake Bay Foundation. My colleagues with us today are Amanda Cather and Lisa Garfield. Amanda, if you'll pop to the next slide. Amanda is our project director. She is housed under Future Harvest, as is Lisa Garfield, who manages the Million Acre Challenge for Future Harvest. And there are lots of other folks who also have parts in this project who work with those different organizations. Next slide. I can't not mention that we're running a sweepstakes right now as part of our Count Your Acres campaign. It's an opportunity for farmers to win some pretty cool prizes and position themselves to connect with resources and farmer networks through the work of the Million Acre Challenge. You can find out more about that by following us on social media. You can go to our website at millionacrechallenge.org. We'd love to have you take a look at that. Next slide. Today, we are super excited to be hosting Keith Berns and Steve Groff, 2 of the nation's soil health gurus. And they're going to help respond to questions, clarify why farming with a soil health mindset is, I'll borrow words from one of our project farmers, a Maryland grain producer named Richard Winters. He describes it as a win for everybody, a win for the farmer, a win for the environment, and a win for society and future generations. Next slide.
Oh, God.
So Keith is going to be our first speaker today, although there's going to really be a lot of exchange. So I think you'll find that it's going to be somewhat more informal than some webinars. Keith combines over 20 years of no-till farming with 10 years of teaching agriculture and computers. With his family, he's been farming in South Central Nebraska all his life. In addition to no-tilling 2,000 acres of irrigated and dryland corn, soybeans, rice, rye, kale, peas, sunflowers, and buckwheat, he has recently been incorporating grazing into his crop production system. And he notes, I believe, Keith, you can correct me if this is not right, that about 60% of his acreage will have seen grazing animals this year. Keith owns and operates Green Cover Seed, and he also developed the Smart Mix Calculator, which is one of the most widely used cover crop selection tools on the internet. Keith, I'm going to hand it off to you. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Sure. Yeah, my pleasure to join everybody here today. I've been able to be out in your part of the world a couple different times at the Delmarva event out there. We've always enjoyed our time there. So you can see here where I'm at, just smack dab in the center of the continental United States. So kind of right in the middle of everything. Next slide, please. Our farming background, we're completely no-till. This is what we want our fields to look like. We don't even want to be able to see where the planter went through. We just want to see those crops coming up through a heavy residue of cover crops like this. So we used to think this looked terrible back when we were, either tilling or spraying things out. Now we think this looks beautiful, and we think everybody's field should look this way. So next slide, please. We also started Green Cover Seed here about 12 years ago. This was all farm ground 10 years ago. And then we started building. And I show this because it's a good representation of how fast the soil health movement has grown. And, we've had to just pour a lot of concrete and put up a lot of bins and buildings to kind of stay ahead of it. And I'm sure you're seeing the same thing out on the East Coast as well. And it's exciting to see the movement growing. And for being the Million Acre Challenge, I think is a great thing to be able to try to get that number of acreage in Maryland. So happy to be a part of it. Next slide, please. I'm just going to jump right into kind of the topic here. And Steve Groff, my partner, who is also presenting here, he'll introduce himself later, but Steve and I will kind of go back and forth a little bit on some of these economics. But since the topic of, the title of the topic today is turning a profit, I wanted to talk about soil health economics. And I'm not going to show you my farm books because, it doesn't really matter because I'm not farming in your situation. We're going to talk about soil health economics in bigger picture terms. And just kind of talk about how you can use soil health to make a profit. And as I go through this, and as Steve is talking too, you're going to see that we're not going to be talking about any government payments or payments that you might be getting to plant cover crops in Maryland. I know that Maryland is very good about helping out with the cost of that. To me, that's just all bonus money. You shouldn't look at cover crops only being worth it if you're getting a subsidy to do it. That's great if you are, but cover crops can pay for themselves. Soil health practices will pay for themselves. And if they don't, then they're not going to be used long term. They're not going to be used when the payments run out or when the subsidies no longer exist. And so that's what we're going to go through here today of why agronomically they're profitable and they pay for themselves. So obviously the expenses, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on the expenses. You got the cost to cover crop seed, you got the cost to apply them, and you may have some costs to terminate them depending on the situation that you have. And that cost, again, depending on where you're at and what you're planning, it can range anywhere from, probably a low of, maybe $20 to $25 an acre to as high as, $50, $60, $70 an acre, depending on what you're accounting for application costs and some of the termination costs. So again, that's kind of a big range of where the expenses are going to land. But I want to spend the time that I have here talking more about the income side. What value are these cover crops in particular going to bring to the farmer? And so we'll look at it in three different categories. There's going to be direct value to the farmer. There's going to be indirect value to the farmer, and then there's going to be value to the environment as well. So let's go ahead and get started on that with the next slide. And so what we see here is cover crops will impact the yield positively when done right and when they're incorporated into the system right. So this is a study from the SARE group. Rob Myers did this with SARE and with ASTA and with a number of different people. This data is a few years old, but it's the best stuff that's out there right now. They're continuing to update this. But if you look here, this is the average, and they surveyed thousands of farmers on this. Okay, this isn't just a few farmers. This is a pretty good survey selection. You can see the difference. This is the increased yields following cover crops. So with corn, 11 bushels, 6.7, 2.3. And this is in 2-year increments. You can see soybeans there as well. I just kind of put in some average numbers of where things are at right now. At $6.50 a bushel on corn, that's $43 an acre. At $12.50 for beans, that's $41 an acre. And that's just simply the value of the increased yields. Now, is everybody going to see these kind of yields? Not necessarily, but you will notice, and this is very interesting to me, that the biggest yield was in 2012. And I'm sure that 2012 was not a good year for you folks out there as well. It was a horrible year for the Midwest and the high plains where we farm. It was one of the driest years ever. A lot of this data is coming out of the Corn Belt, and those Corn Belt guys in the driest year they've seen in many, many years actually had the biggest yield increase when they had a cover crop, which kind of goes counterintuitive to what you think it might be. Of cover crops taking moisture. So Steve, I'm just going to ask you a quick question. Have you seen similar type things, in your area and the people that you work with, or are your people seeing an increase in crops following a cover crop?
Oh yeah. It's funny you mentioned this because I'm thinking back to 1999 when it was dry here in the Mid-Atlantic region. And that's when I was doing work with Dr. Ray Weil, University of Maryland. And I'd asked him the question 4 years before in 1995, do cover crops pay? And it was a sincere question. And so that led to what turned out to be a 12-year research trial on my farm. 4 years into it, 1999, we got 28 bushel corn yield increase where we had planted cover crops the previous 4 years. The question was answered for me in 1999. Ever since that, yes, cover crops pay. Now it's, okay, how do I maximize their results. So absolutely, when you have challenging weather events, wet or dry, that's when cover crops are going to shine. Ironically, the very next year in 2000 was a very good year, and we saw no difference in yield. So it's all about, there's and we've been having, widely, wide variant health events. So I think that is the message we have here, is that in extreme weather is when you're going to get the benefits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so what we're doing when we're adding this diversity to our system, we're really bringing a resiliency to our cropping system, and that's what's missing in so much of our operations. We've lost a lot of that resiliency, especially out in my part of the world, and I'm sure on the eastern seaboard too. It's just so much corn and soybeans that we've lost that diversity. So that's just right off the bat. We see cover crops improve the yield of the following cash crops. And again, I'm going to preface that by saying when it's done right. And Steve, I quote you on this all the time. I hope you don't mind. I always give you credit. I love the saying that Steve has, that cover crops will make a good farmer better and a bad farmer worse. And what that just simply means is they have to be managed. You can't just throw them out there and expect them to do something without properly manage them, planting them at the right time. Steve's going to talk more about this in his part of the talk. You got to treat them like a regular crop, and you have to put thought and effort and good management into it. So let's go to the next slide here and talk about some of the other values. There's additional direct values to the farmer in addition to just increased yields. Saved and cycled nutrients is huge, and this year even bigger because of the increased cost of fertility. And so this is just some research that the Iowa Soybean Association did. What they found is fields without cover crops lost an average of 0.14 pounds of nitrate per acre per day between April and September. And fields with cover crops lost an average of 0.05. And they're basically sampling tile lines, the drainage lines. And so over that period of time, that equates to 15 pounds of nitrogen. And when nitrogen was 30 cents a pound, you might think, well, that's not a huge deal. But you know what? That's a huge deal now, not only in the cost savings, but it's a huge deal to the environment as well. If you're saving 15 pounds of nitrogen per acre across, let's just say, Elizabeth, a million acres, that's 15 million pounds of nitrogen that we're not putting into the water streams and water sources. So that's a huge direct value to the farmer, as well as one of those indirect values to the environment. So next slide, please. But we're also seeing with the saved and cycled nutrients, not only the 15 pounds of nitrogen, there's also in corn, we're seeing 25 pounds an acre of nitrogen saved after harvest on average, because, corn doesn't necessarily always use every bit of the nitrogen that's out there. There's always a little bit left over. And if we can get that tied up in our cover crop and hold it, especially if we have a wet spring, that nitrogen is going to be there then for the following crop. We're gonna put it in a biological form that's not nearly as susceptible to leaching. So if you say 40 pounds of nitrogen and it's 80 cents a pound, that's another $32. So again, as we start looking at what are the income benefits to cover crops versus the cost, all of a sudden these things are starting to add up. And that's just nitrogen. That has nothing to do with phosphorus and all of the other nutrients that are being cycled, that are being freed up. They're being liberated out of the mineral profile in the soil. Steve, what are you seeing on your farm or with the clients you work with on some of this nutrient cycling thing with cover crops?
Yeah, I've done a lot of research here in the farm, and I guess you'd say I'm kind of fortunate in that research being done on my farm. I mean, we've reduced overall fertility almost 50%, and that's based on research. So I have that benefit, you might say, but I've become more and more comfortable with that as the time goes on. And as I'll share a little bit later on, that's probably the biggest fear that farmers have, is losing yield in their cash crop. And you just got to get comfortable with this, and you have to try stuff, because as you said right out the gate there, Keith, we could all put our numbers up there, but they're almost irrelevant, because every farm, almost every field is unique. And this is where the art of farming comes in the context of growing cover crops.
Yeah. And again, Steve's going to talk about this a little bit in his part of the talk about, take a chance on a few acres, whether it be with cover crops. take a chance on a few acres with cutting back your nitrogen. Maybe cut your whole field back some, but make just a strip or so where you cut it back by 50% and just see if you take a yield hit on that. Everybody can afford that kind of an experiment on one pass through the field. And with the technology that most people have these days, it's pretty easy to variable rate that. It's pretty easy to keep track of that on a yield monitor to know where that's at. So it's really important that you understand, if you're saving these nutrients, it does you no good if you're continuing to put on the same amount of nutrients that you put on before. The savings is only going to come if you can reduce what you're putting on. And we've seen a lot of people that have been able to do that. So let's go to the next slide. So those are the direct values, the increased crop yield and then the nutrient savings. But there's some huge savings also that are more indirect. And so this would be one on water management. Now, this may not be as important for you folks, in most years because you get a lot more rainfall than we do. This picture is actually from Oklahoma, very dry, Western Oklahoma. They probably get 18 to 20 inches of rain. But they got a huge rain, and one of our customers, Russ Jackson in Western Oklahoma, took this picture, exact same soil types, exact same rotation. And as he was driving down this road, his field is on the left, and you see absolutely no water standing whatsoever. That all went straight in because he's got fantastic infiltration because he's been doing no-till and cover crops. On the right-hand side, his conventional till neighbor does a lot of tillage. Has almost no infiltration or very low infiltration. And so when this big rain hits, you can just see it's just a lake. It's just a pond over there. And so he lost probably 3 to 4 inches of water from this rainfall in a very dry area. And just think what that's going to do to the next crop yields. Next slide, please. Water management is so important, and cover crops can help that because we're going to get better infiltration from it. We're going to have less raindrop impact blowing up the soil and having it seal over. We're going to have less evaporation in the growing season. Each one of those can be probably 2 to 4 inches worth of water savings. And that's not even in addition to what you'll save moisture wise if you're no-tilling. This is just strictly from the cover crops. And then, you can actually use moisture if you need to in your area, especially if you have wet springs. If you let your cover crops grow and plant green into them, you can actually manage the moisture by taking some of it out of that top profile by letting the cover crops grow. So the value, what's the value of having that stored water? Well, it might not be a lot in a wet year. Like Steve said, they didn't see a lot in that good year, but in a really bad year, it's huge. It can be a huge thing. So go to the next slide. I think I got a little bit of, so let's just say we save 4 inches of water. The next slide will kind of show what that might be worth. This is some research in Gothenburg. They have a corn research station out there, but basically they're saying, the latest data here in 2009, and it's probably better than this right now, but they're saying every inch of water can equate to 10 bushels of corn. And so that's where we're seeing those big corn yield increases in a dry year is the extra moisture savings that we're getting from no-till and cover crops, because moisture equals bushels. And so if I can save 4 inches of water in a drier climate or a drier year, that could easily equate to 30 or 40 bushels of corn. And that's pretty typical. That's what Steve saw in a dry year. That's what guys in the Corn Belt saw in 2002. And so that saved water means a lot to people in dry areas or everybody in a dry year. And so, it also means a lot for not washing our nutrients into, in your case, Chesapeake Bay, in my case, into the Mississippi and down to the Gulf of Mexico. And so, Steve, what comments or thoughts do you have on, what have you seen on water infiltration and just water management using cover crops?
Yeah, I think for us, at least in the last, at least 6-8 years, we've had wet springs, and this whole concept of planting green has really taken off. And one of the advantages is, as you mentioned, that the cover crops actually take up the water and help dry the fields out. So, and then I'll just say too that I'm doing part of the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agricultural Soil Health benchmark study that was referenced at the beginning here. They were just here last week, and our soils, they use the Cornell Soil Health Test, And when they get saturation point, then they start measuring. And we were at 6 inches per hour infiltration after saturation. That's pretty good. I've heard of better ones out there, but that's pretty
really
good. And so, this whole thing of water management, there is a direct correlation to soil health. And we're talking a lot about cover crops here today. Cover crops influence that hugely. So understanding how all that works is important, but it takes time. That was in a 39-year no-till field, my first no-till field. So, you got to know these caveats. It takes time to get these benefits and careful management, which we're going to stress more and more.
It does take time, but the biggest improvements will be made right at the beginning. At least the biggest percentage of improvement will be made at the beginning. So you've got to get started. And that's the great thing about this challenge is, for people that haven't been doing it, it's a great place to start. So go to the next slide. I think I've already kind of covered this one. So go to the next one. The other thing about infiltration and water management, if you're not infiltrating the water into your soil, the only other option for that water is to run off. And nothing good happens when water runs off. We have erosion, we have nutrient loss and export. And so, what kind of value can you put on topsoil? Topsoil is incredibly valuable. There's probably no way we can value it enough, but just strictly from a nutrient value, that can easily be $8 to $10 per ton of topsoil. And, I think that 4 tons per acre of topsoil is not an uncommon thing to be lost. And I know I've heard Iowa talk when Iowa researchers say, what the number one agricultural export from Iowa is? And of course, everybody says corn or maybe pork. Says no, the number one export from Iowa is topsoil. They lose, if they're producing 200 bushels of corn, their average erosion rate is about 250 bushels of soil being lost to produce that. And when you think of it in those terms, that's a huge number. And I don't know what the number is in Maryland or Pennsylvania, Steve. I know on my farm it's almost zero, and I know I've been to your farm too, Steve, and it's almost zero because we keep it covered. We have great infiltration and we have great residue cover. And when you have those things, you're not going to have erosion unless there's some sort of catastrophic event. And so, just the value of keeping your topsoil in place, just from the nutrient value alone, not to mention all the other services that organic matter is going to produce, could easily be, $40 per year by not letting your soil wash away. So, and again, there's so many other things that organic matter and topsoil are going to do for you, but just strictly from if we're just looking at an easy calculation, you could easily have $30, $40, $50 a year just in saved nutrients. So let's go to the next slide. We've got, I got to get finished up here and turn it over to Steve. But, other indirect values, when we increase organic matter, and I say we can increase, and this is, I think we can increase our organic matter 0.1% a year is pretty realistic. So 1% increase in 10 years, you can do that without really getting super crazy and having all kinds of, tricky things that you're doing. You can do that in a standard rotation using cover crops, using no-till, and just using basic soil health principles. So in 20 years, if you can increase it by 2%, what's the value of that? Well, there's all kinds of value. You're increasing your infiltration, your water storage ability, your nutrient exchange. It's just going to be so much more resilient. And then that makes it almost bulletproof to droughts. It makes it almost bulletproof to a lot of other things. And that's why in a bad year, you're going to see those soils really, really shine. So next slide, we'll just talk briefly here about values to the environment, because that's such an important thing for this project with the Chesapeake Bay. And I know that with a lot of the emphasis that's been put on your area, you have done a lot for cleaning up the bay. Steve and I have both been in a couple of films that have featured, what we're doing out in the Midwest, but what Steve and people out there are doing. And it's been really interesting for me to watch, so the fishermen, especially talking about how the bay has improved over the last 20 years with some of the work that's been doing there. So, carbon sequestration, that could be another important value. There's 7 tons of carbon per percent of organic matter. So, if we're fixing 0.1% per year, that's 0.7 of a ton of carbon. What's that going to be worth? Well, good luck trying to figure that out right now, because the whole carbon sequestration market is pretty crazy. I view that kind of like a government payment or a government incentive of some sort. It's gravy, it's a bonus on the top, but cover crops will pay for themselves without carbon payments. Cover crops will pay for themselves without an incentive, again, when done right. But there is definitely potential there. And I don't know where that's all going to land, what that's going to be worth. Do not ask me what the best carbon program to go with is going to be, because we don't even know what it is for our farm. I have no idea what it would be for your farm and your operation. My advice is just kind of take another year or so and kind of watch and see what's happening. It will be worth something. We just don't know what yet. I think I just got 2 more slides here. Move to the next one. So there's lots of values for the ecosystem services. $20 to $30 an acre, possibly in the future. There's some programs out there that are being talked about, and you're going to be hearing about in the near future that are talking about even more significant payments. There certainly are going to be opportunities out there for you to cash in, if you will, on some of the practices that you're either doing or that you could be doing for this. So again, let's not spend too much time on this. Go to the last slide that I have here. Other values that are possible, reduce crop insurance premiums. That's happening in a few states. I think there needs to be more of that, because there's no doubt if your soil is more resilient, you are less of a risk to crop insurance. So you should be paying less. Conservation payments. And then I always show this too, and Steve will talk about this because it's the topic of the book that he recently wrote. There's going to be huge future marketing opportunities if you're producing agricultural products from a system like this that has all these values to the ecosystem. People are going to pay more for that. It may be difficult for them to do it right now. That is going to get easier. It's going to be easier for the customer to understand where that food came from and how it was grown in the future. That's just technology, and that's sensors, and that's traceability. That's all moving very, very quickly. And when that comes large scale and that becomes cheaper to do, there will be huge marketing opportunities for people like Steve and people like myself and many of you listening to market our products that are being grown in these types of farming systems. And that could be worth more than all the other things put together that we've talked about. And so if you go back and add up all the things that I talked about, with increased yield, the nutrients, the water, the organic matter, the topsoil, you're well over $100, $120, maybe up to $150 an acre of benefits, both direct and indirect, on some of these things. And so, do cover crops pay? I think Steve answered that question with Dr. Weil, and the answer is yes, when done right and when done properly. And so Steve is now going to talk a little bit more about some of the management things that have to happen to make that work. And Steve is farming much more in your type of environment. So some of the practical things that he'll talk about are really going to apply to you folks. So Steve, take it away.
All right. But I wonder, Elizabeth, is there questions you want to have now for maybe for what Keith shared?
Yeah, there may be some questions, and while people are working up the gumption to put those in chat or say them out loud, let me just mention a couple things. Just putting in chat right now a couple of upcoming conferences that both feature soil health information and some really great speakers. One is Future Harvests Conference, January 13th and 14th. You can find out more about that at futureharvestcasa.org, and the Delmarva Soil Summit, which Keith mentioned earlier, which is February 7th and 8th at delmarvasoilsummit.com. So check those out. Both have virtual options for folks that are too far away to come in person. I want to introduce Steve properly, who Steve and his family farm 215 acres of cash grain crops, cover crops for seed, pumpkins, hard squash, and heirloom tomatoes in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. For the past 25 years, his Cedar Meadow farm has conducted thousands of cover crop research trials, out of which he developed the tillage radish, which I'm sure most of us have heard about, a cover crop known and used around the world. For the past 20 years, he has pursued how to make nutrient-dense foods a reality on his farm. He's the founder of Cover Crop Coaching, and his recently released book, The Future Proof Farm, Changing Mindsets in a Changing World is available at stevegroff.com. Any questions before we move into Steve's slides? All right, Sharon asks, do you feel over time, after years of cover crop applications, the amount of cover crops applied on yearly basis decrease slightly as the soil and infiltration rates improve, where cost to buy cover crops would be less yearly over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that you would necessarily stop using them. You're definitely going to change the composition of the mixes. And what we've seen is when you're first starting this process, you need to go with more legumes in your mixture, which costs more money, no doubt about that. And as your soil starts becoming more biologically active, as the biology is doing the role that they're created to fulfill, you get so much more natural nitrogen sequestration and availability that you will need to decrease the amount of legumes that you're putting out there, or you will start going backwards in the amount of carbon that you have. So I think it's more of it's a different composition to the mixture, and they get cheaper because as you can take legumes out of the mix and put more grasses and broadleaves in, then those mixes become cheaper and cheaper. Can you go lighter seeding rates and things like that? Possibly, but other benefits that you're getting from the cover crops are weed control. And you don't want to skimp on your seeding rates if weed control is one of the major things that you're trying to accomplish with the cover crop. So I think that you can certainly decrease your nutrient application more and more as you do it. So you'll save money there, and the cover crops will change, but I don't necessarily see them going away if they're really part of your system.
And Steve, I think I'll let you carry on with the follow-on to this question, also from Sharon, asking about changing multi-species cover crops to different types over time. Keith, you just sort of addressed that based on the crops you've grown or what your yields are looking like, and then do you grow cover crops to harvest seeds in future years?
Well, first of all, I was kind of caught off guard about 15 years ago, and because I didn't understand the dynamics of carbon and nitrogen ratios and all that stuff, where I had this phenomenal looking cover crop in the fall, 3 feet tall, just thick. Came to plant corn, there's nothing left. The field is bare. I was literally embarrassed. Bare fields. I mean, I have a slogan, soil is meant to be covered. The problem was I didn't understand my soils were changing, and I needed to react to that. Now we know, as Keith said, you start leaning more to the grasses as your soil becomes more and more healthy, and more earthworms are digesting it. Everything's working better. So I'm here to say I concur totally in that. So you have to see how your soils are functioning, and that does kind of lead me into my first slide. Actually, I don't know if you want me to start off here now on that, but there's definitely a factor in that you have to be an observer of each field, literally, of your farm, and then how to specifically manage it. So, did you want me to ask more questions, or should I get right into my talk here?
I think we'll carry on. I don't see anything more in chat just now.
Right.
I think you're going to address the fact that you do harvest, you do grow cover crops for seed. So that.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. I'll mention that quickly. Yeah, I'm growing black oats. It's a cover crop that I can grow here in the Mid-Atlantic. And as Keith knows, as someone who's selling seeds, we don't have a good region here for some of the other cover crops, even cereal rye and triticale and some of them, because we're too high humidity and too damp. We don't have good quality seed. That's why it's grown in drier regions. Not that we can't do it, but black oats work well for me. And so I have been growing cover crop seed black oats for the past 4 years. And so it's a nice part of my cash crop rotation here in my farm. But black oats has certainly come to be, I really like that cover crop. It works well, particularly because I grow a lot of pumpkins and hard squash, and we don't plant till June. So even though they're later in maturing, that's good in my case. And again, that's matching your cover crop to your need. And that's important. That's important in this whole context of cover cropping. So yeah, I'll go right into this here. My first slide. Do you know how to manage your soils. Think about that. Each of you. Do you know how to manage your soils in the way they were designed to function? And a lot of times we as farmers, we don't think that way. And as the scenario I just laid out there, 15, 20 years ago, I didn't know as much as I know now. And I learned that. And it's almost like, I use the analogy of the famous hockey player, Wayne Gretzky said, you have to skate to where the puck is going. Or if you're a hunter, a duck hunter, you have to lead the duck. In a way, cover cropping is that same thing. And in order to do that, you need to observe what's going on in your fields, in your soil. And knowing how your soils are designed to function, you can learn that by keen observation yourself, but also talking to other farmers and other people, other researchers. And we have a lot of people on here that are also advisors and so forth. All of us collectively are figuring this out. I'm 25 years into this and I'm still learning. And that's what's exciting about the whole soil health movement. First it was no-till, then it was cover crops, and it's diversity and animals, and now nutrient density and all these things we never sought to go to where we're at right now, but we're ending up in a path that is exciting because it's not only just helping farmers in their quest on a personal level, you could say we're helping the planet. So I know that's a big stretch there, but it's true. And this is a worldwide movement. So it starts about how do you understand how your soils were designed to function? That then sets you up to be a better manager. Now, moving along here, the fear of losing yields is a powerful marketing tool in agriculture. And you guys know what I'm talking about. It's a reality, though. We as farmers need to make a profit in order to stay in business. And this is a new concept. And this is a huge barrier for people just getting in. Now it's a little easier now because cover crops and soil health is no longer a fad. It's become a trend. And I think farmers are positioned, or they're poised like never before to adopt cover crops. We have so much more information and so forth. Now, next year, I want to say the thing that's really helpful, and this is about mindsets here, treat your cover crops like your cash crops. Keith alluded to that. You have to do that if you want to be successful. And you don't just buy a bag of cover crop seed and consider yourself a cover crop farmer. And even though I do support the cover crop programs that are out there, Maryland has a robust one, sometimes farmers don't fully utilize that. Again, Keith mentioned that because I do believe this is important. The profit is in the management, just like cash crops. You have good farmers and bad farmers. And it's about the management, about how they manage their farm. And now we're including another level here of management, cover crops or soil health. And there's a bunch of opportunities out there if we're careful and astute and diligent about figuring out what they are. I know everybody they would like Keith and I to give you a prescription. This is exactly what you should do in your farm. Well, the problem of it is that prescription will be different for every single one of you. Now, we can give basic recommendations and so forth, but I want to train people to better understand for themselves. And what you have to do in order to maximize soil health for your farm is you need to understand and think about what you are trying to accomplish. What are your goals? For me, it was soil erosion back in 1982. That's it. Soil erosion. I could care less about the Chesapeake Bay in 1982. I just didn't like soil erosion that I had to close the ditches to cover so I could be able to harvest my crops. Now, I do care about the Chesapeake Bay. I care about my fields. I care about my soil. I care about my local spring, my local streams that are around here. But what I'm doing in my farm that is affecting that makes me a better farmer for me. So what's better for me is better for the planet. And I love to use that saying because it is a reality once you understand how to do it. Now, the bottom point I have here, or the points I have here is the best advice I can give you guys today, all you who are watching this, is identify what your goals are, and then you learn from those who are successful in what you have already identified that you want to accomplish. You follow that? Identify what you want to accomplish, and then go to those people who are doing that and have a track record of it. And also, point number 2, understand the difference between an advisor and a mentor. And this is huge because, and this is nothing against advisors. I know we have advisors on this webinar, and some of you are great, and I appreciate that. I gotta say, in that space, there are some advisors that are simply there selling a product that may or may not be helpful in what your goals are. So I prefer to go and get my information from mentors, people who are doing already what I aspire to do. And that can look different for all of us, but think about that. Who are the potential mentors in your space that you can tap into? I'm a part of several social media groups and different aspects of that where we challenge each other. We ask each other questions, and it's worldwide. And so they've been very helpful to be able to do that. So this is one of the key components, I feel, of the best way to actually maximize soil health on your farm is to walk through it with someone. So next is a challenge I want to give. And those of you who heard me talk here in the last couple of years probably seen this before, but it still holds true no matter if you've seen this for 4 years straight. And that's my 10% cover crop challenge, or we could say 10% soil health challenge. And I would like you to think right now, and this doesn't, I don't care if you're a farmer, you're an advisor, what you're doing in agriculture. Can you aspire in 2022 to take your game up 10%, whatever that means? It may mean 10% more acreage of cover crops. It may go on to more mixes. It may mean to think about adjusting your mixes now to whatever, as biology shifts on your farm. It may be, just educate yourself more. I'm just trying to challenge us not to sit in status quo. Now, one thing that's interesting, as Keith alluded to, is that this year we have an interesting dynamic that hasn't happened in recent times, and that is the high cost of nutrients. And I have been saying for years that when the price of nitrogen goes up by 50% or 100%, which we're right there now, there will not be enough cover crop seed in the world to meet the demand. And I say that because farmers are primed like never before. So I guess I'm going to pause here and say, Keith, what are you seeing as the cover crop salesperson here in the context of this whole dynamic that's happening?
Yeah, it's a great question and great point, Steve. There is going to be cover crop shortages, no doubt, because this increased demand is also coming on the heels of a poor production year where a lot of the seed is grown. A lot of this small seed, the clovers, the brassicas, are grown in the Pacific Northwest, specifically the Willamette Valley in Oregon. And if you were paying attention this summer, they had really, really bad weather conditions, much, much hotter than normal. They had a dry spring. And so there's less of those crops coming out of that area than before, and there's going to be more demand for it, coupled with the fact that it is so hard to bring things in internationally. A lot of times those production shortages are made up from imported seed from other countries, and there's some of that coming in, but not near as much. You've seen the pictures of how many container ships are setting out off the coast of California. It's more difficult. Logistics is making it all more difficult. So my advice is, if you're going to be buying cover crop seed, and regardless of where you're buying them, especially if they involve clovers, go get your commitments made soon, because those are going to run short. The cereals, I think we'll be fine. The rye, the barleys, the triticales, the oats. It's going to be more expensive, no doubt, because we have to pay more to buy the acres for producers to grow those things on, because we're competing with $6.50 corn now instead of $3 corn. We're competing with $12 and $14 soybeans instead of $7 soybeans. So we just have to pay more to all of our growers to produce those. So Yes, there will be shortages. There will be tightening of that. We're going to have to find new areas to grow some of these things in as the demand increases, but that's all part of it. And frankly, that's going to open up new opportunities for farmers. And Steve's right. You guys aren't a good growing region for seed production because seed production needs dry harvest times. And you guys just don't have that consistently. So yeah, that's all going to be part of the fun. So if you're going to get, especially some of those things, don't delay.
Keith and Steve, let me just jump in real quick. Couple things where we've got about 12 minutes left and I do want to have a little space at the end. So let's keep that in mind. We have a question in chat. My understanding is that potash is not bound to the cover crop tightly and therefore releases rather quickly to the cash crop. I am considering taking a biomass sample of cover crop, getting it tested for potash, and then crediting those pounds in my fertilizer program for corn and beans with nutrient cycling in mind. Have you done this, and or is this a valid consideration?
Let me just say this. We've never applied potassium fertilizer. Our soils don't need it. They don't call for it. Elizabeth, I will send you a link that you can send out to everybody that's subscribed to this. We did a webinar 2 days ago. It's not on YouTube yet, but it will be soon. We had Dr. Saeed Khan from the University of Illinois on. He has some fantastic research on potassium fertilizer. And basically he's saying you don't need to be applying potassium fertilizer. Your soils have it. And it moves so quickly between the mineral form and what's available to plants. It's not like phosphorus. Everybody treats it like phosphorus, that it takes so long to become available. It's not. It just comes back into solution so much quicker. So I'm not going to answer that because I think that, yes, you could reduce. I'm saying what he's saying, you don't need it at all because your soils will provide it if you let them. Great webinar. I'll send that to you, Elizabeth, so you can get that link to everybody here. We should have it up by next week.
That's great. Thank you. Steve, I know you've got a couple more slides and we do have one more question in chat right now. Do you want to take that now or do you want to?
I'll wrap it up, then we'll take the question.
Okay.
So where is agriculture headed? I think everybody in this call knows the answer. It's on the right side there. Soil is covered, living in roots at all time, working our cover crops into our cash crops. That's where it's headed. And that's why, I guess that's why I wrote my book. I try to give people a heads up. And you can go to the next slide there. And, it's just, I just see this is the future. The future-proof farm is a farmer who knows what's coming, relatively speaking, and gets prepared for it. And thank you, Keith, for the nice comments there. I really appreciate that. But, it's just something that this is an opportunity. That's what I'm excited about. What we have been slaving away at and try to educate people now has become mainstream. And I'll just say the general population is becoming aware that there's something connected here, and it's a complex topic. But I will say this: if we don't move in this direction, and this is why I'm glad to be a part of the Million Acre Challenge, if we don't move in this direction, you as a farmer could become obsolete. You may not have a good market for your stuff. And I'm not trying to threaten. I'm just trying to say, here's a heads up, guys. This is where the direction's going. Here's opportunity. Face into it, learn all you can, and start learning on your farm. So that's kind of my message right now. And so if there's any other question, Elizabeth.
Yep, two
we're
questions.
Ready to. Yep.
Yeah, two questions in chat that I'd like to get to before we close. The first one is, how do you terminate black oats cover crops? Does it terminate naturally after a hard frost? What's the amount of black oats cover crops you're able to produce in a given year to use as cover crops? And why did you choose black oats as a choice of cover crops? Some of that you may have covered, but maybe you can review some of that.
First of all, black oats is a winter oat. It does survive the winter here in the Mid-Atlantic region. I've grown it for probably a total of 8 years, and it's never winter killed. I planted it as late as Thanksgiving, the third week of November. Haven't even seen it, and it grows. I would say I would liken its winter hardiness to wheat. So that's the winter hardiness issue. So terminating it would be just like you would terminate any of your other cover crops, but it does mature later in the spring. That's why it fits well into my pumpkins and squash. because I don't start planting until the beginning of June in that. Pairs well with hairy vetch, which I love. So that's for my reason. It's a great to graze if you're grazing. It's certainly not for everyone, but and I know, Keith, you sell it. Maybe you want to comment on black oats, because it is fairly new.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to be a seed yielder like a regular grain oat. It's more of a forage oat. It's fantastic for grazing. The cattle guys love it. It is longer season, like Steve mentioned, so it stretches your grazing time period out, or in Steve's case, it stretches your cover period out. You extend those benefits. But yeah, it will typically only yield 60 to 70% of what a good white spring oat will do. And so the seed's going to cost you more, but it is a better product for doing that. So yeah, we love black oats. We're growing them. They won't survive Nebraska winters typically. We're growing them mostly in southern Kansas down through northern Texas is where we're having them grown. But yeah, in mid-Atlantic, they'll be fine.
That's great. Thank you. Another question, are the cover crop photos in the slideshow, I presume, showing termination with Roundup?
Oh, so for my slides, I use some glyphosate. Also use Liberty or it's a chemical glue. I forget how to say it now. Liberty glufosinate or something. And I have gotten away from paraquat type formulations, the burn down, the fast burn down one. Brought that back in a little bit to try to reduce glyphosate. And again, my opinion on glyphosate is I want to use that the least possible, and only for specific situations that it's best at. I use a lot of times reduced rate. What's funny? I started the cover crop roller in 1996. The reason I was interested in cover crop rolling was to reduce the use of glyphosate or Roundup. And the price of Roundup was $50 a gallon in 1996. Now we're back up there again almost. I think, again, this whole concept of rolling and other tools to be able to extend the effectiveness of glyphosate, it's interesting how things kind of come full circle. So it's ironic. That is exactly why I started rolling cover crops. And then, of course, the price of glyphosate went to nothing almost. And then here we are today, lots of problems with glyphosate, and the price is back up again. So it's just interesting irony almost, you want to say, in that twist.
So I have a thing I'd like to mention too, Keith, if you can do it briefly. I know you've been, I don't know if dabbling is the right word, you've been exploring grazing in your operation, and I'd love to hear just a little bit about that, because I know we have some grazers on the call with us.
Yeah. We have people ask all the time, can you terminate a cover crop with grazing? And the answer to that is probably not. You can really set it back, you can really knock it back, but to get complete termination is not going to be likely. Now, if you're coming back in with another grazing crop after that, then who cares if you kill it all? Whatever regrows with your new cover crop you planted or forage crop that you planted is probably going to be okay. But to try to completely terminate just with grazing is very, very difficult and challenging. I don't know if you call it fortunate or not, where we live here, we have hard winters, we have cold winters. And so we can rely on that. So the picture that I showed with that corn coming up with all that residue, that was wheat stubble from the previous year that had a cover crop planted into it right after wheat harvest. That cover crop all died either with the first frost or sometime through the winter. And then, I can't remember, that was a number of years ago. We may have done a little bit of whatever our just typical weed burn down ahead of corn would have been, a pre-emerge is what would have been there. We're like Steve, we're really trying to reduce or eliminate the glyphosate usage on our farm. But I'll be honest with you, it's hard. We have gotten so reliant upon it that it is difficult to figure out how to terminate some of these cover crops if you're terminating chemically without it. It was an effective tool for many years. Now it's becoming less and less effective as more and more weeds are becoming resistant to it. And like Steve said, the price is going up. Lots of lots of negative things with glyphosate. You know, I think it's a tool, but it's a tool that needs to be used less and less and less. Rolling is very effective in some situations. It becomes more difficult and less effective with very diverse mixes, because plants only roll well at a certain growth stage. So again, I love what Steve said. The profit is in management, and the termination of your cover crops is a big part of how you manage them properly.
We have another question in chat. Discuss the role of biological foliar nutrients and how you apply synthetic fertilizers or not.
Well, you know, there's a lot of different biological products out on the market there right now, everything from compost extracts to just simply enzymes and stimulants. I think there's a place for them. We've certainly seen at times when they've been very effective for us, and we've seen other times where we put them on and have seen almost no response. I think if your soils are really healthy and you've got good biological activity in your soils, they're probably really not needed as much, particularly the biological amendments, some of the stimulant packages to get things woke up in the spring and get things off to a good start, probably still have some merit. But if you're just starting out and you're converting conventional land to more of a soil health system, I think they have a big role. Again, I'm not going to tell you which ones to use because we're still trying to figure that out ourselves, but they do have a role. And I think they can help us reduce some of the synthetic fertilizers, or in some instances, they can be used in conjunction with reducing the amount of synthetic fertilizers, particularly if you get the right stimulants and the right enzymes in the package. It makes the fertilizers easier for your plants to absorb. And so it makes the whole system more efficient, which means you can reduce the amount that you use. Steve, what's been your experience with that?
Well, dittos, and I'll just maybe take it a couple steps in some other directions. That I'm here to say there's no biological stimulant that's going to work everywhere every time. So stepping back from that, I've tried a lot of them. I've done research, I've done testing on them. Some of them seem to do work, some of them I think don't work at all. I would say, and this is more theoretical, but it does stand to be plausible, is the more you get into a biological system, as the biology increases in your soil, probably the less products will show a ROI. So it really comes down to, and farmers hate to hear this, you have to do your own research on your own fields. I've had salesmen give me products, and we've done tests and so forth because they want me to talk about them, and I will if they seem to have merit. And you know, I've seen some results and I've seen some no results. So the bottom line is it does come back to, do they work in your field? Now, if you have a product that in your region, there's multiple fields that have shown some effect on it, you have an honest salesman, sure, I'm looking into that. Yeah. But biological products are here to stay. They are good, but you have to find out which ones work in your situation. I think that's the reality of it all.
So we are at 10:30, so I need to do a sort of proper closing. We do have a couple more questions in chat, but if folks need to hop off, we can go ahead and let you do that. I want to say such big thank yous to both Keith and Steve for sharing your wisdom with us today. I would encourage everybody here to take advantage of upcoming Million Acre Challenge opportunities to build networks, because they're so critical to how your farm operation proceeds. Come to us with ideas that you may have. Sharon, I see your comment there about maybe future sessions and how other farmers are working to reduce glyphosate on their farms. I put in chat, and I can do it again if you missed it, you can subscribe to get a monthly newsletter from us and stay in touch with us on social media to keep following along with that Count Your Acres challenge. And again, just big thanks, Keith and Steve. This has really been fantastic. But we can answer these last questions for folks who want to stick around. Let me get my cursor to behave here so I can scroll back up. Todd asks, how would a grower know when they reached a point of soil health and don't need biological products?
Yeah, that's
I'll
a
just
great
follow up.
question. Yeah, go ahead, Steve, and then I got a thought or two.
Okay, so I'll just follow up with the last conversation. It's the same answer. I mean, you can take foliar tests. There's SAP analysis out there now. If you're familiar with those testings, that's kind of curious where you can actually see a little bit closer what your plant's taking up. You're gonna have to just try it. I don't know how to be more simple than that, because every farm is different. I mean, it's kind of like our own personal bodies, our own physical health. Not everything, not the same vitamins work for the same people. If you want to say that, mineral supplements, all that, you have to try it, see what works, and go from there.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, there's biological tests out there, you know, Haney test, PLFA, and I would encourage you to look at those and figure out how those fit into your system. The easiest thing to do, if you go out and it's moist conditions and you're digging in your soil and you don't see earthworms or earthworm activity, your soil health sucks. You got a long ways to go yet. If you're seeing a lot of earthworms and a lot of earthworm activity, you've got some things going on in the system. That doesn't mean that you've arrived, but it means you're sure going the right direction and you're getting there. Steve's right. You just got to use some. You don't have to use it across the whole farm. And in fact, you should never use a product across the entire farm because you'll never know if it's working if you don't at least leave a check strip where you didn't put it on. So at least leave a check strip, and otherwise you just never know if that product had efficacy or not.
That's great. Well, I think we'll wrap up there. I know there's always more questions. Keith, you've put your email address in chat there, keith@greencoverseed.com. Steve, yours is, I'm trying to come up with it from memory, stevegroff.com. What that is.
Yeah, Steve at stevegroff.com is easiest.
I'm typing it in right now. So
All right.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great. We've gotten good feedback in chat, folks just saying what a great presentation it was and that they learned a lot. So really appreciate your time and all that you're doing out there to be ambassadors for soil health. It's much appreciated. Everybody have a great Thursday.